Okay. All right. I would like to call to order the Malibu City Council special meeting of April 29th, 2020. This meeting is being held by teleconference due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we appreciate everyone's patience as we navigate this Zoom meeting process. Council members and city staff are participating from remote locations, and all votes will be taken by roll call vote. Members of the public can participate in the meeting or watch it by going to malibucity.org/virtual meeting. At this screen, you can click on the tab to either just watch the meeting or to sign up to speak on particular items. You will only be able to speak during the meeting if you follow the instructions on the screen under the Sign Up to Speak tab. Once the item is called, no further speaker signups will be allowed. So please make sure you visit malibucity.org/virtual meeting early to download the Zoom app and sign up to speak. The city clerk will call on those who have signed up to speak when the item is called, so you must be present in the Zoom meeting to be recognized. Council members, if you have comments to make during this meeting, please raise your hand and I will call on you in turn so we can make our discussion clear for the record and the public. May I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Mullen?
Here.
Councilmember Peak?
Here.
Councilmember Wagner? Hold on, Jefferson. There you go. Councilmember Wagner?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Pearson?
Here.
Mayor Farrer?
Here.
You have a quorum?
Okay, thank you. May I please have an approval of the agenda? Skylar?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Heather, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Peak?
You're muted. We can't hear you.
Hello? Councilmember Peak?
Yes.
Councilmember Wagner?
Yes.
Councilmember Mullen?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pearson?
Yes.
Mayor Farrer?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And may we please have a report on the posting of the agenda?
The agenda for this meeting was properly posted on April 24th, 2020.
Okay, thank you. All right. Do we have any council comments? Rick, do you have a council member report?
Nope, I think I covered everything on Monday.
Okay, thank you. Skylar? No? Okay. Jefferson?
I have nothing new to add.
Thank you. Mikey?
Yeah.
Whoops, you're muted. You're muted.
We still can't hear you.
Better? It says I'm muted by the host.
Okay.
No, we can hear you now.
Okay, you can. Thank you. Sorry about that. Who knows? Pushing buttons, seeing what happens. I just wanted to say a few things here that this meeting tonight is absolutely no fun at all because this is very tough right now. The list of things I personally am passionate about, the very reasons I ran for city council are likely unfunded in our new budget. And I join with many of you that this is not where we want to be. I've read every line of the budget, and I hope everyone realizes that the cuts are being made across the board to existing programs, to every single department. And the impact goes far beyond being able to fund things that you and I care deeply about. And I guess, thank goodness, we aren't in the shoes of Santa Monica and Oxnard, who are among many other cities facing cuts that we can't even imagine. Our rural nature has made us much more resilient in this pandemic. So the highest priorities of the city council, as directed by city council, are public safety, fire rebuilds, and school separation, which I noticed that's partially unfunded as well. So there's a long list of things here we're looking at and that are difficult. And I know Reva and Lisa will go into more detail, but So this, I saw in the press today that it said, you know, city balances its budget as if there was no problem. The only way to balance the budget is with this really difficult cuts that nobody wants to make. And for those people saying we should be using our reserves right now, as one of the people elected to be responsible for the city's financial health, I feel that would be, to be honest, totally reckless, as we're heading into wildfire season and who knows what else, an earthquake or anything else could come along. So difficult times. If I had my way, I'd love to be eventually on city council when we're not in the middle of a disaster, and our funding's more what I think other councils are used to, but that's where we're at. And I just wanted to chat about it. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mikey. And for me, a couple of activities and then some other comments. Mikey and I were both in on a call today with the USC Price School of Public Policy on local governments and their response to crises, which I found beneficial. And then I was on my LA County League of Cities monthly meeting today, just before this. So besides that, I will echo everything that Mikey said. But along with that, I want to recognize that our COG cities and many of our other neighboring cities are facing really drastic situations. And I'm thankful that we're not in that position. We're not laying off staff. I know there will be positions that will go unfilled, but we're not doing layoffs, and in some cases, massive layoffs that other cities are looking at, and program cuts. So I think we have to count ourselves fortunate for that. It didn't happen by accident. It happened by planning on the part of our elected officials and our city management. Along with that, I just want to say that I'm hopeful that this budget is conservative, and that as the year goes on, there may be room to reinstate some things or make for a more robust set of programs than the conservative budget that I think we're seeing this evening reflects. So that's it for me. All right, so now let's move on to item 1A.
So Mayor, this is City Manager Reva Feldman, and I'm going to start with a bit of an introduction and then turn it over to the Assistant City Manager, Lisa Soger, who will be able to give a pretty in-depth presentation. This has been a very tough budget to put together. I know you all heard me say that last year after the WOOLSEY fire, and I didn't actually think it could get worse, and unfortunately it has. This is my 16th budget that I've put together for the city, and so definitely have a lot of history and how we put things together, and am grateful to the staff who's worked so hard, but also really to our community and our residents who make us have the ability to have such a great budget. So I wanted to start kind of a couple of things sort of that both you, Mayor, and Mayor Pro Tem touched upon about why we're in a different position than most cities. And it's very important for us to kind of start with that in the conversation. First of all, Malibu is a contract city, which means that we don't have our own law enforcement and fire services. So we don't have those costs that we pay on an annual basis, but we also don't carry those ongoing pension costs for public safety, which are tremendous and have over the years, not just now, had a huge impact on other cities. Our main revenue source is property tax. And property tax, even with the devastation of the WOOLSEY fire, has remained steady. And knock on wood that it continues to remain steady. But that is one of the big factors of why we are in a better position than many other cities who are much more reliant on taxes from hotels and visitors and sales tax, that we don't have that makeup in our budget. we're in this pandemic with a strong general fund reserve. Even after the acquisition of the vacant land in 2018, and even after the Woolsey fire, our reserves have been replenished, and we're going into this year's budget with strong reserves. You'll hear me and you'll hear Lisa over and over caution that we need to continue to maintain those reserves. One, we're not out of this pandemic. There's a lot of unknowns, and this budget is conservative because of those many unknowns. And we don't know if there'll be another disaster. We didn't think this would happen. We don't know if there'll be another fire, and there could also be an earthquake. And so we need to be very mindful of that, and also that we still have a large outstanding balance due to us from FEMA, so need to keep our reserves for those cash flow purposes. The other thing that serves us well and has served us well is that from the get-go, Malibu has had a very good handle on its ongoing pension costs. And while we do have an unfunded liability with CalPERS, because we're a young city with not a lot of retirees, and again, without the public safety burden that other cities have, our pension costs are at this point manageable. Lisa will touch on that a little bit more and what's happening with PROGRS. But I think it's really important for us to kind of understand why we're not in the same position. With all that being said, we are being hit by coronavirus and COVID-19. Obviously, all of our businesses, other than essential services, and all of our restaurants, for the most part, are closed. Sales tax is where we get most of our sales tax comes from restaurants. And so with those major restaurants being closed, we are seeing a dramatic hit to our sales tax. With everything closed and visitors not coming, our parking tax is being impacted. Our citation revenue is down, filming revenue is down. So there's a lot of categories where things are dramatically down. When we started this budget, we started with the things that we absolutely have to do. And again, Lisa and I are very conservative in how we draft things, but we need to obviously pay our debt service. This will be the first year that the debt service comes online for the new vacant land. It's a partial payment this year. It goes up from $500,000 to almost $1.2 million next year. So we know that's coming down. Property insurance after the Woolsey fire has increased, so we have increases there. Our sheriff costs continue to increase, so that's a cost we have to pay. We have mandated water quality expenses. We have that in there. We know we have district elections that we have to make happen, not only this year, but again next year after the census. So there's all these things that are on that absolutely have to do list. Every department in the city went through their budget and cut costs, and then cut costs again, and then cut costs again. So every single budget, as you'll see when Lisa talks, has taken a significant reduction. Again, our goal is to continue to serve our community, provide core services that are so important, particularly the rebuilding after the Woolsey fire, but other things that are important, our cultural arts programs and our community programs and our goals to be environmentally sustainable and maintain, banning pesticides in our parks and those things. We really try to take those to heart. I know I've seen a lot of the correspondence from the community, and I know it seems like we're not taking into account the things that are so important, but we are, and we've always had a very robust, aggressive work plan, and that's going to have to step down this year. We're going to have to scale it down. We don't have the resources. What we were able to do is come up with a one-time fix for a budget by using some of the funding that we got from the Southern California Edison settlement after the fire. But that's a temporary fix. And so we go into that knowing we're able to fund staff with that money instead of using consultants. But then all the things that staff was doing, because we had consultants doing that work, is going to have to shift. And so that's kind of the higher level of where we are. We look at down the road. We got obviously a budget you're looking at is just a plan for 1 year, but we need to forecast multiple years out. And we know, as I said, we're going to have increased debt service. We know our sheriff costs are going to go up if we decide to staff that sheriff station that's being built. The fee waivers took an impact to our revenue. So it's a lot of factors that go into where we get to things. And so with all of that, I just, again, want to thank staff. I want to thank the council for your support. I am committed to trying to do everything you ask of us always, but I also need to be realistic and tell you when we can't get things done. So I look forward to a good conversation about our work plan after Lisa's presentation, and happy to try and do everything we can to get us through this unprecedented time and get us through whole with good solid finances. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Reba.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, and I'm going to ask for the PowerPoint. Perfect. Welcome to the first presentation of the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget. I also want to thank staff, our finance staff, Renee Neerman, Joni Hand, and Brenda Cho, who keep the wheels moving and have kept them moving, even working remotely and coming into City Hall when they need to. And truly thank the department heads, because they have really sharpened their pencils and done the hard work to get us to this budget that we're presenting tonight. With that, I think we can go to the next slide. So for many years, the city has had robust revenues and reserves to enable the council to fund important community priorities. Last year, for the first time in over a decade, the proposed budget had limitations due in large part to the Woolsey fire. When we presented the budget at mid-year, the city was recovering well from the impacts of the Woolsey fire. Revenues were strong in all categories, and the city's general fund undesignated reserves were increasing. The picture has changed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent stay-at-home orders issued by Los Angeles County and the state of California. These orders will negatively impact many revenue sources, including sales tax, transient occupancy tax, gas tax, planning fees, and building permits for both fiscal year 2019 and fiscal year 2020-2021. We have prepared this version of the budget, assuming the stay-at-home orders will continue through May 15th, and that businesses will begin to operate in the summer in a limited capacity. While many cities are estimating severe hits to their revenues, over 40% of Malibu's general fund revenue comes from property taxes, which are not currently anticipated to decline. This budget also does not factor in a second wave of COVID-19 cases requiring further stay-at-home orders, which would cause greater impacts to the revenue projections. Every department was asked to reduce their expenditure budgets to bring the whole budget into balance. The services of outside consultants have been reduced, and many of the tasks they performed will now be handled by staff. Due to these impacts on revenue and resources, staff will again be asking council to make some hard choices regarding the work plan. Next slide. The city's budget is based on the expected revenue for the upcoming year. In fiscal year 2020-2021, the city anticipates receiving $54.5 million of revenue, including $30.1 million of general fund revenue. General fund revenues are projected to decrease by $2.2 million from the current year. Many of the city's tax revenue sources are anticipated to decrease due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Sales tax alone is projected to drop by $750,000. Transient occupancy taxes, hotels, and private rentals are projected to decrease by a combined $900,000. The economic effects of the pandemic are also anticipated to negatively impact the number of applications coming through planning, building safety, and public works. Revenue from licenses and fees and service charges is projected to decrease by a combined total of $695,000. Next slide. As Riva mentioned, property taxes are highest source of revenue in the general fund, and it accounts for 46% of the general fund revenue in fiscal year 2020-2021. In prior years, property tax made up around 40 to 42% of the general fund, but projected decreases in other taxes have given it an even larger share. In prior years, licenses and permits and service charges were 12%, and now have dropped to 9% and 11% respectively. Sales tax and transient occupancy taxes have dropped from 11% of general fund revenue to 9%. Next slide. In a review of general fund revenue over the past 10 years, we demonstrate that the city has had financial growth and stability. The city has seen significant growth, with general fund revenue increasing from $21.6 million in fiscal year 2011-2012 to $35.3 million last year. In a normal year, Riva and I are conservative in budgeting and forecasting. So due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are projecting general fund revenues to decrease this fiscal year and next fiscal year. As updated information comes in from the state and the county, the budget will be adjusted accordingly as the budget process moves forward. Next slide. Assessed property value. Information is provided to the city from the Los Angeles County Assessor's Office and shows an assessed value of $17.7 billion. This represents a 4.7% increase over the previous year and a 60% increase over 10 years. These numbers are actually reflective of the homes lost in the Woolsey fire. The year prior to the fire, assessed values increased by 7.3%. The strength of the city's assessed values and subsequent property taxes will help the city weather the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. The growth in secured property tax follows the same trend line as the city's overall general fund revenue and the growth in the city's assessed property value. 10 years ago, the city received $6.7 million in property taxes, and last year that number was $11.1 million. Our conservative projections anticipate that number remaining flat for the current year and next year at $11.3 million. We will adjust these numbers if we receive more information about the potential impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on property taxes, which to date we have not heard. Next slide. The city's second largest tax revenue source is sales tax, which has experienced growth over the past few years. The city's major sales tax contributors are typically restaurants. The Woolsey fire has had an impact on this revenue source as well. The fourth quarter of 2018 was down almost 20% from 2017 due to the closure of Malibu in November of that year. Unlike other jurisdictions, the holiday quarter is not usually Malibu's peak sales tax season. The summer months are much higher. The city's sales tax revenue has been rebounding after the fire. Based, however, on the stay-at-home orders and the shutdown of non-essential businesses, including restaurants, our revenue projections show a $500,000 drop in the revenue for fiscal year 2019-2020 and a $750,000 drop for fiscal year 2020-2021. We will be monitoring closely the county's and the state's plans for reopening businesses, and we will adjust our revenue projections accordingly. The current budget also assumes that the city will eventually receive the sales tax that has been deferred by the governor and is treating this as a cash flow issue. HDL Companies monitors sales tax revenues for the city and is assisting us with sales tax projections due to the pandemic. Next slide. The city's utility users tax revenue is projected to be slightly lower as well, with annual revenue in the amount of $2 million. This is $200,000 less than the prior year. These taxes are levied on the charges paid by users of utilities, including electricity, gas, and telephone. The utility provider collects the taxes as part of their bills and remits the money to the city. The loss of homes in the Woolsey fire and the closure of businesses due to the stay-at-home orders are reflected in this decrease. Next slide. Tax from hotels, motels, and the short-term rentals of private homes has increased over the past 10 years. Tax from hotels and motels was $2.3 million in fiscal year 2017-2018. The Woolsey fire impacted this revenue source as well. Revenue in fiscal year 2018-2019 was $2.1 million. One of the 7 hotel properties in the city was damaged in the fire and has not yet reopened. The COVID-19 pandemic is now also affecting hotel taxes. We are projecting revenue of $1.7 million in the current year and $1.5 million for next year. Earlier this year, Council directed staff to bring forward an item for the November 2020 election that would increase the city's transient occupancy tax from 12% to 15%. The proposed budget does not include a rise in revenue due to the possible tax increase. If the tax rate increase is approved by the voters, an amendment to the budget will be presented to the Council. Next slide. When the city first began collecting revenue from short-term rentals in 2009, it generated $100,000. Last year, revenues exceeded $2.4 million. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected this revenue source as well. We are projecting revenue of $1.7 million for the current year and $1.3 million for next year. We are projecting these numbers conservatively in anticipation of the proposed home share ordinance for the short-term rentals, which will be presented to the Planning Commission when the stay-at-home orders are lifted. Next slide. During the budget process for fiscal year 2019-2020, the Council authorized waiving fees for Woolsey Fire like-for-like and like-for-like plus 10% for primary residences from November 9th, 2018 through June 30th, 2020. At the mid-year budget in January, Council extended the fee waivers through December 30th, 2020. Uncollected fees are projected to total $4.2 million through that time. The proposed budget assumes that the fee waiver program will end on December 30th, 2020. Next slide. The proposed expenditure budget is based on the Council's priorities and work plan. The work plan for 2020-2021 is attached at the end of the budget and details the city's priorities and which departments will work collaboratively to achieve them. The City Council set its 3 top priorities for fiscal year 2019-2020 as public safety, Woolsey fire recovery, and school district separation. We plan to go over the work plan in detail with the Council after the formal budget presentation. Next slide. Total expenditures are projected at $62.7 million. The general fund expenditure budget is $33.9 million and includes not only city operating expenses of $30.15 million, but also some one-time capital projects that are being funded with general fund designated reserves. Other major expenses include $21 million of special revenue expenses. Legacy Park project fund expenses are budgeted at $1.9 million. The Civic Center water treatment facilities operating budget is also projected to be $1.9 million. All expenses for operating the facility will be reimbursed through assessments to the connected properties in Phase 1 of the water treatment facility. A new fund for the Southern California Edison Woolsey Fire settlement has been included and will be used to fund the ongoing recovery from the Woolsey Fire. The city received $13.5 million in December 2019 from this settlement. Expenditures of $3.3 million are anticipated for fiscal year 2020-2021. Next slide. In fiscal year 2020-2021, the city must make debt service payments on Legacy Park, City Hall, and Trancas Field. The first interest payment of $550,000 on the certificates of participation for the 2018 land acquisition must be made in the coming fiscal year. Debt service will total $3.7 million. In fiscal year 2021-2022, the debt service for the land acquisition will increase to almost $1.2 million, and that will include 2 interest payments and the first principal payment. Next slide. Public safety remains one of the city's highest priorities. Law enforcement is a major part of that public safety mission. The city will spend over $8.5 million on its contract with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department next year, which includes $713,000 for the beach team. This represents an increase of 6.07% for the county's required administrative increase and the liability trust fund. This contract expense is 28% of the city's annual operating budget and is the city's biggest single expense. It should be noted that the new sheriff station at the Santa Monica College Satellite Campus, set to open in fiscal year 2021-2022, could add up to $3 million to the city's annual sheriff contract. City staff was in the process of coordinating several town hall meetings to discuss the station prior to the outbreak of COVID-19. It is unclear when those meetings will be held now. We recognize how vital it is to hear from the community on this important subject, and we will make sure to schedule them once the stay-at-home orders are lifted. Next slide. The overall budget represents significant reductions in expenses from prior fiscal years to meet the expected $2.2 million loss in general fund revenues. Certain costs cannot be reduced, such as property and liability insurance, debt service, law enforcement, and other mandated activities. To trim expenditures, all department heads look carefully at their annual budgets and reduce travel, training, operating supplies, printing, professional services, and any non-essential expense. A cost of living increase for city staff was also removed to reduce expenses. All this with an eye to providing services and programs to the community as has been expected over the years. Next slide. The city has prioritized the Woolsey fire recovery. City staff and consultants have been dedicated to helping homeowners through the rebuilding process. To date, 232 applications have been approved by planning, 95 building permits have been issued, and 2 homes have been completed, with more slated to finish soon. To shift expenses from the general fund, consultant costs have been reduced by $1.1 million and $961,000 of staff time from planning, building safety, and public works has been transferred to this effort. The funds received in the Southern California Edison Woolsey fire settlement can be used to cover these costs on a one-time basis. This shift of using staff for the rebuilding efforts has an impact on the city's robust work plan because existing staff resources cannot assist with rebuilding and other tasks simultaneously. Next slide. The proposed budget includes funding for 81 full-time employees and the equivalent of 10 employees working as part-time staff. This is a reduction of 6 full-time equivalent positions from the current year, saving over $300,000. The reduction has been achieved by leaving vacant positions unfunded. No layoffs of staff have been necessary at this time. Additionally, the student intern program has been suspended for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. All salary ranges, positions, and benefits are approved by council as part of the final budget and will be presented to the council in June. The city typically provides an annual cost of living adjustment to its employees. The adjustment is derived from the Consumer Price Index for the County of Los Angeles, using an annual percentage from February. The cost of living adjustment of 3.4% has not been included in the proposed budget for staff salaries. This reduced expenses by $265,000. The ongoing costs of public employee pensions and retiree health benefits continue to be a difficult topic for many municipalities. CalPERS contribution rates, which are now at 18.75% for classic employees and 7.87% for new employees, have been increasing slightly over the past few years. Staff is monitoring the economic forecasts now closely for their potential impacts on the CalPERS contribution rates. If CalPERS adjusts its discount rate and investment portfolio, the city will be responsible for higher annual contributions due to a larger unfunded liability. Next slide. The Public Employees Retirement Pension Reform Act, or PEPRA, was implemented to reduce retiree costs. Any public employee hired after 2013 falls under the PEPRA rules. For the first time, the city's proposed budget projects a greater number of new employees over classic employees, which helps curtail pension-related costs. And this is actually a lot faster than I think we anticipated seeing this crossover. We knew it was coming, but it's finally happening. The city has worked hard to be aware of CalPERS pension trends and plan accordingly. This is made slightly easier because the city does not have any public safety employees or unions, which limits our liabilities. Additionally, the city has always had conservative PERS contribution plan. In addition to pension costs, the city will pay $217,000 next year to cover health insurance for its existing retirees. By requiring 5 years of employment before health benefits are vested, the city has been able to limit its future liability. In the next year, the city will contribute another $524,000 to these other post-employment benefits, which is a mandated cost. Next slide. The proposed budget includes $16.3 million for capital projects. Ongoing multi-year projects include the Street Overlay Project, improvements to Pacific Coast Highway, and improvements to Civic Center Way. The design for Phase 2 of the Civic Center Water Treatment Facility will continue. The construction of the new temporary skate park will be completed, and the design for the permanent skate park will be underway. It is important to note that no general fund undesignated reserves will be used for capital improvements in fiscal year 2020-2021. The city will use special revenue funds, grants, and designated reserves to complete these projects. Next slide. Each year, the council awards funds to local nonprofit groups through the General Fund Grant Program. This year's budget includes $150,000 for grants. The application deadline was extended from March 31st to April 10th to give applicants more time under the COVID-19 stay-at-home orders. 25 applications have been received, totaling $573,000. The grants will be discussed by the Administration and Finance Subcommittee at a date still to be determined, and the subcommittee's recommendations will then be brought to the council. Next slide. At the start of the current fiscal year, the city had a general fund undesignated reserve of 70% of the annual general fund operating budget. The reserve remains strong even after the use of $13 million of reserves to complete the land acquisition in September 2018 and after the impacts of the Woolsey fire. Strong revenues in the first 3 quarters of fiscal year 2019-2020 contributed to maintaining the reserve going into the COVID-19 pandemic. Even with decreases in revenues projected under the current economic conditions, the proposed budget now provides for a general fund undesignated reserve of 76% of the annual general fund operating budget. Council policy requires that the city maintain at least 50% in reserves. To maintain the highest credit rating, the city must maintain at least 65% in reserves. This reserve has helped the city overcome the Woolsey fire and now positions it to weather the COVID-19 pandemic. Maintaining a healthy reserve is also critical for our preparation for future disasters, such as a fire or an earthquake or anything else the world might want to throw at us. Next slide. The proposed budget anticipates a starting general fund undesignated reserve of $22.98 million and an ending reserve amount of $22.95 million. All the facility and infrastructure repair projects from the Woolsey fire must be completed by the city and submitted for reimbursement to FEMA. Historically, these reimbursements have taken years to be received. In the proposed budget, we are showing these FEMA costs as a liability against the general fund in the amount of $8.5 million. The Southern California Edison Woolsey Fire Settlement Fund is being used for the costs for Woolsey Fire rebuilding and the city's 6.25% share of the FEMA projects. Based on the current year expenditures, this fund will start the 2020-2021 fiscal year with $10.4 million and end with $7.1 million. Next slide. Looking ahead in our budget process, the Administration and Finance Subcommittee will meet on a date that we have yet to determine to review the general fund grants and to discuss the budget. The budget public hearing will be held on June 15th, and the final budget will be back for a review on June 29th. At this point, I am concluding the formal presentation, and I know we can certainly have we're here to answer any questions. The department heads are also available. We can also begin the discussion of the work plan, unless you would like to take public comment first and then begin the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. Do we have any public speakers?
We do, Mayor. We have 4. Would you like to call them now?
Okay, I think so, yes.
Okay. I'm going to call them in order as follows: Joel Schulman, Craig Hill, Doug Stewart, and John Mazza. The first is Joel Schulman.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. I see it. Okay. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. We understand your situation. However, as you recall, the situation with the dumpsters is causing a present and clear rodent problem, with the dumpsters feeding and multiplying the rodent population. Therefore, it's critical that this situation, which exists now, should end. As you recall, the waste haulers and the food service establishments were counting on clear advanced guidance on the timeline because they have to procure and train people. Therefore, one thing that should be made clear to everyone is that the ordinance, whatever the funding level, will definitely be in effect on June 1st as scheduled. There can be no change in that. We would like to propose that the existing protocol that precedes the dumpster ordinance, which costs $6,000 to inspect 70 establishments twice a year, that should be replaced by what the March 9th City Council meeting directed staff to 4 times per year for the first year. That was determined by the City Council as a direction to staff. That's only $16,760 more than the existing $5,380. Responding to public complaints could be an adjunct to the monitoring process that city staff could do. So that should help too. Once violators have been found and determined, it's really essential to notify and possibly fine them. this should be a very minor cost done at a desktop. And it's really important to notice that the better the job, the better the investment in enforcement and monitoring, the cheaper it's going to be. The reason is the fines, which could easily result in several $1,000s, will pay for itself. So please keep that into consideration, that the fines, if a good job is done, if an investment is made in monitoring and dealing with violators, this will not have the costs projected in the budget. It'll be far less. In summary, our request is that it be made very clear that this ordinance will be in effect, whatever the funding level, that there will be monitoring, and that violations will be enforced rigorously and hopefully with financial benefit to the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Craig Hill.
Hi, everybody. I agree with Joel. Don't cut dumpster lids, dark skies, and put a priority on the Environmental Commission. And note that many of the trend graphs you were just shown are misleading in not having a y-axis that starts at 0. So keep that in mind. My main comment, please reconsider raising the appeal fee to $750. Here's why, with a few remedies. The fees affect the whole community. They're the quintessential item to be heard in a full live hearing where you don't have to be tech savvy to participate and you have more than 72 hours to learn about it. And the fixed income seniors who'd be hardest hit are the same ones who might only get their local news in a paper that to them just disappeared. The sole rationale to raise it, that cost might average over $8,700, was discarded by each of you. You each said variations of, well, we can't expect to recoup these costs. And you were right, charging an additional $250 is negligible in making up the supposed shortfall of over $8,000. If that was a problem to solve, then the increase would solve 3% of it. But at the same time, it imposes an extra 50% burden on appellants, some of whom are those same fixed income seniors. Why? You were told it would reduce the cost to taxpayers, but the community would overwhelmingly agree that a tiny marginal increase in their tax bill, unnoticeable, would be worthwhile to ensure that they or others less fortunate could afford to access to justice. Anyway, the evidence you heard overstates the problem. A dozen appeals per year? In 2019, there were 6, only 3 of which were residential applications. Meanwhile, the commission heard about 50 new applications, not counting Woolsey rebuilds. So those 3 residences represent a 6% rate of appeal, which shows a commission getting it right 94% of the time. The other 3 appeals were commercial or governmental, one brought by the city itself, and another, the Point Doom Alligator Teeth, was brought by Coastal by proxy, the way you guys responded to it. And then Malibu Beach Inn, which brought no new evidence for staff to spend time on. So 3 residences. It's not credible that they averaged 37 hours of staff time each. All staff had to do is update the existing report, focusing on a few narrow matters. And in the end, you gave no rationale for the increase that you each didn't also dismiss. So it was arbitrary. So what to do? Mikey raised the good idea of checking what comparable cities charge, but somehow you ignored that. You could leave it at 500, but link it to the CPI. You could raise it to 600 and link it. Or maybe you could split it into 2 fee schedules, one for residential appellants, one for commercial and institutional. So charge the residents 500 and charge the deep pockets 2,000. Or you could certainly include a hardship waiver, as county courts do with filing fees. The bottom line is that most taxpayers would feel better knowing that the least advantaged can have a voice, even if it means an increase of literally $1 or $2 on their tax bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Doug Stewart.
Good evening, honorable council members. Thank you for making it possible to have comments about this proposed budget while operating in a virtual meeting format. This is a very critical topic at a critical time. Our city has a general budget that's now dealing with its second crisis in less than 18 months. The work product of these 153 pages goes a long way toward avoiding a third crisis by having to take massive cuts to city programs and essential services. For someone who spent years working with budgets, I believe the city staff and council are to be commended that this first draft shows only an insignificant shortfall. What is missing is highlighting the detail of probably 3 or 4 major factors that got the budget to this point. The first is the shortfall of nearly $5 million or 14.6% of less general fund revenue compared to our last normal year, which was 2018-2019. The second is funding just over $16 million in capital improvement projects without significant impact to the general fund by obtaining over $15 million of grants and special revenue funding. Third is the undertaking of Woolsey related repair items and maintaining key staff members by judiciously moving money among dedicated funds. An unexpected curveball problem, though, is the nearly $500,000 increase in sheriff's expense for this next fiscal year. All in all, this first draft is a job well done in a very difficult situation, and my hat goes off to you and thanks to you. However, the budget work is not finished by finding just another $30,000. As the staff suggested, and I wholeheartedly agree, the city should anticipate and budget for the worst with a possible second wave of COVID and possibly natural disasters during the next fiscal year. While many worthy line items and nice to have projects are now delayed or canceled in the next fiscal year, we do have our city moving along in spite of our setbacks. Not everyone will be happy with the end budget, but you have produced a year of stability, and hopefully the city will have a better revenue flow after that. I hope this message of making the best out of these very difficult circumstances becomes well known among the city residents, as I, for one, think this is a very solid start, especially when compared to many of our neighboring cities who are dealing with even greater revenue and structural budget problems. Thank you very much for listening, and good luck with all your hard work on this.
Thank you.
And finally, we'll hear from John Mazza. It doesn't look like John is actually in the meeting.
Okay.
So that's all.
He's often under Robbie.
No, neither of them are in.
Okay. All right. So, council comments. Let's see, who'd like to go first? Rick? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'll go first. Thank you very much, Mayor. I want to make a few comments. Go back to the original comments at the beginning of this meeting by the Mayor Pro Tem and yourself. I thought they were great. These are difficult times, and a lot of us ran on getting certain things done and certain priorities for the city, and a lot of the cuts that are being contemplated, at least, dig into and delay and defer some of the things that are very important, especially to some of the people who put in comments. But it's important to remember, and I thought all the things that both of you said were right on, and I appreciate you leading off the meeting with those comments, as it frames the present state of where we are in a good way. And it's not easy doing all these things. And I think we have to remember that we're in a state of emergency. And the whole state is in a state of emergency. And every state in the United States is in a state of emergency. So let's not forget that. And not only that, this is the second big crisis that the city has had to deal with in a very short period of time. And one of the previous council members, Lou Lamont, used to always say, hey, you're only one natural disaster away from bankruptcy as a small municipality. And we're not. And we're not. And I think the reason is because the people who look after the money for the city, that's the city manager, the assistant city manager, and all the people who assist them in putting this budget together, always do a good job and always are super conservative and leave plenty of reserve for unforeseen circumstances. And we've certainly had our share of unforeseen circumstances to the nth degree over the last couple of years. So I think it's important for everybody here and everyone, all of the residents, to realize we're in a state of emergency. And this one, at least in the last one, the fire came through and it burnt down a bunch of houses and we kind of knew where we were. This one's still unfolding before us. We're kind of in the middle of it. Think things are looking up, but we don't know. We don't know what lies ahead. And we're, along with the rest of the country and all the states and the county and every country in the world, we're dealing with the mystery tour. And this is not the time to be tapping into our reserves. It's a time to be thankful for the fact that we're in a very strong financial position and that we have people who have done a very good job of teeing us up for success, not only for the Woolsey fire, but also for this. And the road ahead is still very unknown. And although it may look like we might be transitioning out of this in the near future, some of the fiscal impacts of what happened over the last month may not even be realized or felt for a while. So I think it's time to be super prudent as we continue going forward. You know, when I was a military pilot, we always said power available has to exceed power required. That's what keeps your aircraft in the air. And the margin between what's available and what's required is what enables you to have safety, maneuverability, operational options. And what that is for our city, that difference between those two is the reserve that the city manager keeps. And that is what's enabling us to have breathing room here during this second big emergency that was not planned for. So, you know, Malibu has some very unique aspects to it. We get challenges that other towns don't have. We have a bunch of people who descend upon us every weekend in the summer, and we have certain strengths and challenges, things that other towns don't have to deal with. And fortunately for us in this case right now, as well as having some smart people who are minding the checkbook, we also should be thankful that our primary source of revenue is the property taxes, which so far are doing fairly well. Remember, in all of this, we've been waiving the rebuilding fees for the Woolsey rebuilds. That's the numero uno priority after public safety, I should say. It's the second priority after public safety. And that, I think it's going to be about $4 million for all of that. I think that's very important. I think that's where our priorities should be, is making those people whole. And I'm glad that we're still able to support all of those construction efforts for all those people who've been devastated in the last emergency that we had. And I think the city's doing a very good job of looking out for them. But like I said, we're not out of the woods yet. I know it's super frustrating, especially for the people who've contacted us about, you know, they've put so much effort for so long into things like the dumpster ordinance and everything related to what Poison Free Malibu has done for the city, and they've had the patience of the Sphinx as they've supported this for years to get these things over the goal line, and that only to be, you know, now we're contemplating pushing the goal post further down because of this event, as well as the dark sky ordinance and the short-term rental thing. I mean, the people who have put the work into all of those need to be commended, and they're going to be, they've expressed their frustration, and I understand that. And I think that we hear you. We hear you. I want to hear what all the other council members have to say about that, but I just wanted to let those people know that we don't disregard those things at all. But this is the time where, you know, getting back to my military pilot days, this is where we have to lighten the load and we have to get down to basics. And it's like aviate, navigate, communicate. We got to make sure that the aircraft doesn't hit the ground. Okay. And they're doing a very good job of steering us through all of this. And I just wanted to say thanks to Cammie Winnikoff. You know, she sent a very nice and understanding email because she put so much effort into the dark skies thing. And that's going to be not totally thrown out, but like a lot of these things may have to be delayed a little bit on aspects of the implementation. She was very understanding about that. And at the same time, she was telling us not to delay the dumpster ordinance. So that was nice of her to be looking out for others. And Doug Stewart, I thought your comments were really good. These are difficult times. It's an emergency, and it's our second big one. And thank God we're in a pretty good financial position as we move forward. And those are the things I have to say about this. And I will say that, you know, Mikey said at the beginning, they did, if you look at every page of the budget, they adjusted the variables. This is the big algebra equation, and all the variables got adjusted to get us to where we are right now. and they did a really good job on it. And I'm very thankful and appreciative of all the efforts that our city manager and and Lisa and everyone in every department who looked at their budget and throttled it back a little bit. And that's all I got to say, but I probably had more to say.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Jefferson?
Thank you, Karen.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. As was stated by the city manager, the assistant city manager, Rick, Mayor Pro Tem, and Mayor, our biggest asset is our property taxes at around 45% for our budget. And that's admirable. And the sustainability of that percentage seems to be reasonable to assume that it would be the same in the next year or two. Part of the reason that is going to be the same or close to the same is because the values out here don't depreciate, because the quality of life that we guarantee our residents is paramount. Part of that quality of life that we provide maintains that property value. It maintains desire to be here. It maintains the resale value that the realtors depend on. So knowing that the property values increase each year, and we've never really seen big decreases even in 2008, it's safe to say that that quality of life that we have to assure our property owners and out of area property owners that own larger estates, that quality of life is something simple like the dark sky ordinance or the dumpster lid or environmental sustainability. Those features, which are very low budget, are things that we still need to furnish as a city. And my feeling is if we come out of pocket a little bit here or there for some of these functions, to keep those perspectives on the property values valid, so that people see that, hey, the city takes care of the property owners and the quality of life, those are paramount to me, and I don't think we're asking about a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Jefferson. Skylar, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Karen. I think that Rick did a really good job, and Jefferson, of summing up, I think, a lot of what we're unfortunately, facing during these times. And I appreciate all of the hard work of Riva, Lisa, and everyone else on our staff, everyone for, cutting their costs and whatnot. I had a question maybe for Riva or Lisa, which was, it seems like with some of the transient occupancy tax and some of our sales tax, that those revenues may drop significantly further than what was proposed. I think there was, I forget exactly the amounts, but I was kind of just looking at how we came up with those numbers, and a little bit to my alarm when the budget first came out and we're going over this, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, which I think we're very fortunate. But I just want to make sure that we're being super conservative, because I don't want this to go south on us.
So Skylar, the numbers that we've provided in this version of the budget assume that the county stay-at-home order will be lifted on May 15th, and businesses will start to operate and kind of ramp back up over the summer. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out what these numbers would end up looking like, used a lot of prior year actuals, talked to businesses. We contacted every restaurant to see who was open, who was closed, how, what were they serving to-go food or not, to kind of get a sense of the business that was going on. We have HCL as a consultant that does analysis on our sales tax, so spent time with them looking at trends not only in our own community but countywide and statewide of what's being impacted in the retail sector. So we spent a lot of time drilling down to everything, same thing on the hotel revenue. So you are right, they could be worse than what we're anticipating, which is why we kind of have this whole cautionary tale that we go into with this budget, which is this is a snapshot in time, and we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know whether restaurants will be able to open back up at full capacity I don't think that is realistic right away. So if a restaurant's working at half capacity, that means they're only generating half the revenue, and that's half the sales tax that that restaurant used to generate, and so on down the line. Same thing with hotels; they could be further impacted. So yeah, I mean, I think it's very hard to find those numbers. And while we're all touting that we have strong property tax, not to say the sky is falling, but if this pandemic continues or there's a second wave of it, it can start to impact financially our community and our residents. And there could be a drop in property tax if people look to get their properties reassessed, or if we start seeing a round of foreclosures. And we were very fortunate during the recession, almost 10 years ago, where we didn't have that impact in Malibu. But these are very real possibilities. And so I'm just trying to be as realistic as possible. Again, I know I sound like I just have a lot of bad news, but I'd rather say bad news and come back in a few months with some better news. And I'm happy to answer any of the questions that came up as part of the speakers as well. So.
Well, I appreciate all of the work on that stuff. And for me, it seems like it could be a little bit worse in the future. So that's kind of where I'm at, is what I'm seeing. And it's just tragic to see what's gone on to all the small businesses in our community during this time. And I hope that they can rebound, and I hope that the tax revenue will come back. So I'm sure it will. It'll just take time.
And on that note too, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Those were some of the things that we were mindful of when suggesting postponing implementation of some of these ordinances, because those actually have a real hard out the door cost to commercial businesses right now. And so certainly don't want to put misery on top of misery if we can avoid it and put a pin in it for 6 months or 9 months or a year.
Thank you. And then did you get one more question just in regards to the sales tax? And I know that the state was deferring some of that. Have they sent anything to us saying that don't be expecting this money, it's going to be coming 6 months out, or what's up with that?
Yeah, so what it is it's basically a deferral of property tax. So small businesses can basically use what they normally would pay the state for their sales tax, and they can use it as a no interest loan and then pay that sales tax back in 12 months to the state. So obviously that's a trickle down effect to cities, because it's all part of our 1% that we receive. The part that hasn't been resolved, and there's no information from the state, is what happens if a small business goes out of business and is unable to pay back the state that sales tax that they owed. At this time, it doesn't appear that there's any way for us to then recover our portion. So the short-term impact is a cash flow issue for us. We don't feel that it's something that we can't get past, again, because of the small percent of sales tax that we take in. But again, it could impact us long-term if 50% of businesses in Malibu that borrow that money go out of business. Worst case scenario, that's what would hit us.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that, Riva. And again, thank you for the speakers. And I know that it's frustrating when we can't do everything that, like Rick said, that we said we were going to do. But we have to be very smart and I think conservative at this time. So thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you, Skylar. Okay, Mikey, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you. Not sure why I'm still blue, but whatever. Just have to have a little color here, I guess. A couple of notes just based on everything I heard. I think mostly to Jefferson here, that one way to think about some of the work plan isn't always financially, it's in people hours. So when you take all the mandatory things staff has to do that they're, have no choice on, and then we extend it out, that's where it gets to be tricky. So I think as we try and figure out how to get things done we really like, we look at staff hours, because that's the metric we're working within, how to get more done with what we have and what they're doing. So I just wanted to share that. I know working with the businesses I work with, that's often the way we break it down, not just by dollars and cents. They're the same thing eventually, but it can be very helpful to look at it that way. And yeah, on the local business side, very, very scary situation. Absolutely. And I just want to commend the city, and also the chamber has really stepped up and we'll actually spend time with business owners, helping them go through the process, whether it's PPP or a disaster loan, unemployment for their employees, all of that, which virtually none of my clients have received a cent yet. So it is really tough. It's really, really tricky out there. On some projects that I'm passionate about that I see being pushed back, because I don't see anything, nothing's canceled, like climate change and adaptation. I'm going to work on it on my own as best I can with other people to see if I can push forward, getting us more ready to get there. Because some of these projects, anything to do with the environment, this is just so important. And yeah, this is a tough time. So I'm going to work hard on my own to figure out ways, and I've discussed that a bit with Riva and with the mayor. So I'm not trying to slow down on anything right now. Just trying to figure out how to get it done any way we can, when we can. And then I did have a question, probably for Riva or Lisa. School separation. I know probably Karen had this question. So I saw something to do with documents is unfunded. Where does that leave us on that? Can you give us just a little bit on that, somebody?
Sure, certainly. And I know we can certainly go line item by line item in the work plan if that's helpful. But in regards to the school district separation, we're in the negotiation stage right now. That's something that I'm doing with Elizabeth Shavelson, someone from the city attorney's office, of course, Mayor Fair and Councilmember Mullen. And we have a team of consultants, of financial consultants. That is all funded right now. So we have active contracts. We have consultants that are doing the financial analysis. The city attorney are working on our behalf, and that is fully funded right now. We're going to get to a point in the negotiation where we're going to have to bring forward a petition to LACO, and that's going to set some things into motion. One is going to be a presentation to the LACO board on the separation process. If, knock on wood, that gets approved by LACO, and then we move forward to the state process, to the State Board of Education, we're going to have to do things like prepare an EIR, do quite a lot of other analysis. That part is not funded. I think we'll have enough time to get through to that step where hopefully our finances will be better and we'll be able to fund them. In prior years, we might have been able to put something aside in a budget so that if it came up, we wouldn't have to come back to council, but this is not funded. But to get us to LACO, we're fully funded right now. And I want to make that very clear that the negotiations are active. As recently as yesterday, I had a call with the team, and everything is moving forward as best we can, even though we're all under the state.
Okay, thank you. Couple more quick points. Sorry to drag on here. Temporary skate park I saw the photos, beautiful. The parking lot's going in, the curbs going in, sidewalks going in, all of that. So that is not impacted. I noticed on the funding, I wasn't worried about it for various reasons, but I just want to hear it. The permanent skate park is not funded at this point, but we still have such a ways to go on that. And we've had some generous outside donors that have stepped up. So what's your feeling on the permanent skate park?
My feeling is I think it's a great project. Let me reassure you, the temporary skate park is fully funded. That is coming out of the reserve that we had that was designated for that. So that is completely funded, and that is underway. As everyone knows, that the parking lot is being completed now. The fencing is going up. The equipment is being made. So this summer, we're going to have that temporary skate park open. The permanent skate park, the design of it, we're using the designated reserve for that, and that is funded, and that is funded in this year's upcoming budget. We have never identified the full cost of the permanent skate park, nor did we ever talk about where that funding would come from. So you are correct. At this time, the construction of the permanent skate park is not funded, but we do have the funds for the design, and that will happen this year. So hopefully we can do a robust fundraising to do that, and certainly apply for grants and anything else, any other source we can think of.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, on I think I've commented on this before. It's very noticeable how many things we seem to have been able to get done in a very difficult environment. We've brought forward a lot of things that, if you really look at the group of them, from rodenticides to STRs to dumpster lids, etc., it's been impressive. So now here we are with what we're dealing with now. Looking at the Dark Sky Initiative, if we have to push that date back, could we still, or how would it work? We still ask for compliance from the owner? I mean, does it cost us money to ask for compliance from the shopping centers and reward them by saying how great they are in public and other things like that?
So you're correct. The dark sky ordinance, there's a couple different factors. There's several phased compliance dates. We're in the phase right now, the compliance for the gas stations. They are all behind in that compliance, but they're all working with the city code enforcement and staff in identifying what they need to do to come into compliance. And there's a whole list for each one of them of why some of them have challenges physically and on their site of why it's difficult to come into compliance. But we've been actively working with that, and we will continue to work with that. The next phase is for all of the commercial properties to come into compliance. And we knew that was going to be a very challenging phase, probably weren't going to meet the deadlines that are outlined in the ordinance for multiple reasons. And now to move forward with that, to have the staff time to go out to every single property, work through with each owner what those issues need to be handled to come into compliance. It's staff time. And then it's also asking commercial properties in this very, very difficult time to spend money to do something to come into compliance. If someone can do it willingly, 100%, we're happy to help them through that. Any new project that's coming into the pipeline that's going through the planning stages and building stages is going to have to come into dark sky compliance. So we'll certainly keep that, push that. But what I would suggest, if the council is amenable to it, for the dark sky ordinance, to actually come back to council and amend the ordinance to just extend the dates by 12 months to give us some time, and also to give those commercial businesses some time to recover financially, so that if they do have to spend money to come into compliance, it's a little more doable for them. So that would be my suggestion on the dark sky, and I'm happy to talk about the dumpster ordinance if you'd like me to do that as well, or any of the other items on the work plan. I know the mayor hasn't spoken yet.
All right. Well, I'll let other people speak. I'm hogging the mic here, but thank you. And it does come down to staff hours, because staff and budget go directly together. So I get that. And obviously we have a little more time to chat about this before we get to finalizing the budget, but I appreciate all your answers, and thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mikey. So let's see, a lot of you have covered things that were on my mind, but I just want to also point out, I'm so incredibly thankful for the work that our staff did to get us to the SoCal Edison settlement in the amount that it was and in the timing, because without that, I have a hard time imagining where we'd be with this budget. So that was just a huge component, especially for this year. And like I think Rick said, we're still dealing with uncertainty. We think there's a reopening date coming from the county for May 15th, but I think we also know it's going to be incremental and phased in. So we're not going from where we are right now to where we were, before this all started overnight, or who knows over what time period. Obviously, we have to fund the mandated items. We've got over $500,000 worth of debt service for the first time this year that we didn't have before. We've got the sheriff's contract. And I want to point out the sheriff, in their contract, they get a cost of living increase, and we have forfeited that for our own staff, and that's worth noting. So I want to thank the staff right now for doing that. I just also have to point out we're the only entity that waived fees, and I'm really glad that we did. It was important to the council. No other city or county waived Woolsey fire fees. And I thought, I think we all think it was a good investment in the community. And, it is what it is. I'm not sorry that we did it. But everything is a trade-off. So, I unlike Skylar, I do think this budget, I'm optimistic that it is conservative, and that we may in the next month two see better news, and then as the year goes by, we may see revenue stronger than we are thinking it's going to be right now. But I'm happy that I think this budget is conservative, and we're hopefully we just don't have another disaster. I mean, we all are hoping for that, but we cannot count on it. We know that. So I think that's kind of all I have to say. Well, no, I'll take that back. I also want to thank Cammie Winikoff for the email that she sent about the dark skies ordinance. We just have to, do the things that we have to do. And we hope to be able to implement things that we all value, but are not the absolute bare bones of running this city. And Joel and everybody with Poison Free Malibu, I hear you. Again, it's not just the cost of the inspections, it's the staff time and everything else. I really would like to see the culture change in this city, and see voluntary compliance. I don't think anybody running a restaurant would say that they're in favor of poisoning the food chain, but I'd like to see their actions reflect that. So if you're out there listening, come on, we can do better. That's my message about that. So that's really all I have to say about the budget. I want to thank Lisa, Riva, all the department heads and everybody for, I think as Lisa said, sharpening their pencil and putting us where we need to be for the coming year.
Mayor, I wanted to just jump in and maybe give some better context to make sure that it's clear on why some of these decisions need to be made, and why it doesn't just come down to an actual dollar cost. So I'm going to use some of our environmental sustainability under our building safety department as an example. We have 2 environmental sustainability staff members and a third one who does all of our water quality compliance work. Of those 2 other staff members, one of them currently is being trained on how to be a permit tech because we had been using consultants to do that work. And so we are literally changing what she is doing to keep her as a city employee during this time. So that's a really good example of someone whose job was pure environmental and is now having to shift into helping the rebuilding efforts so that we can get those tasks done. And that's a really quick, simple example of how we've had to shift what people are doing. Some of the other things that we're looking at that are really going to add to how we actually work in the city are as a result of the pandemic. We are not going to just be able to have a city hall that is wide open with people coming in and waiting in the lobby, having meetings together. Everything, the entire culture of how we work in our building is going to have to change. We're already ramping up to be able to take submittals of plans electronically, which in my mind makes things easier, but on the back end is actually more time consuming for staff and how they have to review it and the back and forth with the applicant. Where we've gone to being able to accept payments for permits online. Again, probably easier for the applicant, but again, staff heavy on the back end. When the stay-at-home order is lifted, we're going to have to move to an appointment-only system for people coming into City Hall. And so someone has to monitor that and manage how that works. Again, a new task that we didn't have before this pandemic. We're going to have people cleaning staff areas, public areas, 3-4 times a day in full PPEs, things that weren't happening before. Same thing with all of our park facilities, all of our public facilities. The cleaning schedules are all going to have to ramp up and be done. So again, that's something that a person is going to have to do, and we have to pay those people to do those things. So it's just, how we're going to operate is going to change. It's going to take more time for us to do things that we used to do. Even just this meeting as an example, the amount of staff time to get us to be able to get to this meeting and have it work well is considerable, much more than a normal old-fashioned council meeting where we're all sitting in the same room. So I just try to lay out how our world has changed overnight. And those are the things that are going to take some time. The dumpster ordinance, I'm 100% in favor of that. It's something I think is incredibly important. Our concern of being able to implement it properly comes from a couple different things. One, the haulers needed to identify the type of locking lid and bin that the commercial properties were supposed to buy. They have not done that, and that's supposed to happen by June 30th. Due to the pandemic, we've been unable to reach them. They haven't responded to us. So we don't even have the actual physical bin lid identified at this point. And if we did, we then have to go to these commercial businesses that are closed and say, you need to buy this now during this time. And I think that's a tough ask. The council had also asked us to do site visits to every commercial dumpster area 4 times a year. And that's 200 dumpsters times 4 times a year is 800 staff visits a year out into the community to check on these dumpsters. That's pure staff time. And let's just say they have to go back. And then what if we have to open a code enforcement case, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The time to monitor it is considerable. And so if that translates into money at some point, because it's a person doing that or people doing that. So if someone else can figure out a way to fund all these things and make this happen, we're 100% for it. But, as you saw, we have 6 vacancies of positions that we just didn't fund. So I'm already down manpower. And then my other real concern is for our staff who have been tremendous, gone above and beyond. I don't have a single staff person that hasn't said, whatever you need me to do, I will do. But what if one of them gets sick? Or what if all of us get sick in the building and things really stop? And we've made all these promises and these commitments. So my job is to be the worry word. And so those are all the things that we take into consideration when we present this to you. So I'm sorry for being long-winded, but I thought that was important.
Thank you, Riva. Okay, Rick, I see your hand up.
Yeah. I just want to say, Mikey, once again, thank you very much for asking that question about the school issue. I called the city manager, I had the very same question. I spoke to her today about that, but I appreciate you asking it so that she could articulate it for everybody else who's concerned about that. And because I feel very strongly about accomplishing that mission. I know Karen feels 10 times stronger than I do about it. And I want everybody to know that it is one of the 3 big priorities on it. But I feel comfortable with with where we are. But thank you very much for bringing that up so that everyone can understand that. Question for Reva. On the last page of the staff report, with regards to the $30,000 shortfall, it says, the budget as currently proposed has a $30,000 shortfall that needs to be met. This amount can be taken from the general fund undesignated reserves while maintaining a 75% reserve amount. Comment on that. That sounds like the easy solution to deal with this $30,000 deficit. What's the upside or downside of that, if you don't mind?
That's the easiest solution. What I would actually suggest, we have to show you, we have to have a balanced budget. So we have to find a solution to it. What I would ask is to just give us some time. We normally bring the budget back within a few weeks, given the stay-at-home order. We're elongating the timeline for the budget process this year. So the public hearing, which is normally at the end of May, will be heard at the first meeting in June. What Lisa and I are really hoping and betting on is that we'll be able to find that in revenue over time of this month. And be able to just present you a balanced budget. And if not, then we would recommend using undesignated reserves. When Lisa and I have over the last week or so been doing the budget, we actually were at $1.5 million deficit is where we started. And we got it down to $30,000, and I probably could have, adjusted a revenue projection, but we had done so much of that already in terms of revenue and cutting expenses and cutting. I just couldn't find any other place to cut. So I would suggest we just sort of put a pin in that problem. And then if we can't find a solution to it in June, then use undesignated reserves.
So that is, we're not voting on the budget tonight. We're basically voting to, or making a motion to deal with that $30,000 deficit, correct?
So you're not making any decisions on the budget tonight. What we're asking for is direction on the work plan. This is usually a time for you to give us feedback. In happier years and more robust financial times. We were able to add things to the budget at this meeting. Obviously, I don't suggest that this evening, but we would just like feedback on the work plan, and if there's any priorities that we have included that you would like to not include, or any other suggestions, that's what we would take at this time. Kind of go back to the drawing board, watch and monitor both revenues and expenses over the next 3 to 4 weeks, and then come back in June for the public hearing with something similar but a little more updated numbers. We get our property tax payments every month, so we would get another tax payment in May and could base on that. Lisa, go ahead.
I was just going to add that the budget projections that we made for the current year were based on all the revenue and expenditures that we had through the end of March. I'm now going to be able to look at what everything that came in and went out in the month of April. So we'll be able to fine tune our projections that much more. Additionally, we're going to get more information from outside sources about what trends they're seeing. As we get information from the county and the state about what a lifting of stay-at-home orders look like in terms of how businesses will open and what the length of that rollout will be, we will also be able to fine tune our projections more than that. So the fact that we were squeezed this down to only a $30,000 discrepancy is so close, but we wanted to show you that we pushed and pushed and pushed and tried. As we go through the process, I think we will probably find a little more room. So I'm comfortable that we were very conservative, so we can be flexible as things shift and information comes at us either way. But definitely when we come back to you the next time at the first meeting in June, we will have just a much better picture. Probably not perfect, because as we all know, there's a lot of unknowns here. None of us had to deal with this before on this level. And but I think we'll just keep getting better information that we can refine as we present the numbers.
Well, I just want to finish my comment there. I've gone over work plan, and I'm, the recommendations of things that and we talked about these, to defer. I want to, just want to point out to everybody, we're not talking about axing those things. We're just talking about deferral of implementation, sliding the implementation a little further down the road. And, some of these things do have impacts on the business. I think businesses, and we do have to be very cognizant of that, because the businesses and the individuals who have been out of work are the ones who are really bearing the brunt of the financial impact of what we're going through. So thank you, Reva, for articulating that impact on the businesses also. So I personally don't feel the need to go through the entire work plan, but I'm happy to do it if any of the other council members want to do it at this stage. We're going to see it again before we vote on it finally.
Thank you, Rick. Any other council comments?
Skylar has his hand up.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, Skylar.
I was just going to make a motion that, that we kind of make that we go as staff's recommendation for this at this time. And, we're maybe anticipating some changes when this comes back. And I appreciate everyone's time on it.
I'd second that.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Jefferson, please go ahead.
One additional comment. I still will be working with our city attorney on the Ombuds office, which will be a time and staff time saver in the long run. Once we implement the dark skies and the dumpster lids, having the office of the Ombuds will definitely save staff time. I'll be working with Trevor and Christy on that, with the president of the University of Pepperdine, Jim Gash, and hopefully we will have another budget saving moment in the next 6 months once we draft a memorandum of understanding or operational platform that we can work with Pepperdine's Strauss Institute of Dispute Resolution. So I look forward to bringing that forward. I'm not asking staff time or city money to do that. I'll conduct the business and bring it to the council sometime in the near future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Heather, will you do a roll call, please?
Councilmember Peak?
Yes.
Councilmember Mullen?
Yes.
Councilmember Wagner?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pearson?
Yes.
Mayor Farrer?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. All right. It is 7:39.